If you have questions during the meeting, you can either chat them or send them to Michael or myself, and we will make sure that they get answered soon. Probably not during this meeting, but in the near future. And then if you want to clap for someone during either the awards or anything, we show hands instead of clapping since we can't hear clapping. So that's all I have for that. So welcome to our first ever virtual meeting, annual meeting of the Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. And on behalf of the entire board of directors, the wonderful staff, I would like to welcome you and thank you for coming, because this is, you know, a big event for us, and we are so sad that we can't be there in person. So this has to be the next best thing. So this is our 25th anniversary year, as Michael mentioned earlier. And we could sit here for probably a couple hours and talk about all the fantastic things that Loudoun Wildlife has done over the past 25 years. But we're going to save that, and hopefully we will be able to get together in person in October for our 25th anniversary gala. So keep that on the horizon, and we will sing about all of our fabulous accomplishments at that point. I'd also like to thank Michael and the rest of the staff and the members of the committee who organized the annual meeting. There was a lot of planning got done. And I tell you, working on this board is amazing, because Michael and the staff take care of so much stuff for us, and they make it so easy. And everyone on the board is so nice to work with. So thank you everybody who's made this possible. I know it was definitely a year we had to pivot, so everything you've done is really appreciated. So we have a couple of business agenda items to get to before we really get started with some of the funner things. We have to approve the minutes from last year's meeting. Those minutes were sent out, and we did get a unanimous approval vote from the membership, so that motion has carried. The second big bit of business we have to do is to elect the class of 2022 to the board. Our board has 2 classes. They expire every other year, so half of our board rolls off every year. This year, we have 4 members returning to the board: Sarah Ali, myself, Allison Gallo, and Etziri Ibanez. And then new on the board, Janet Hensley, Mike Larson, Sherry Bartlett, Colette Berby, and Christine Beckel. So that motion has also carried by unanimous vote. If you'd like to see bios of anyone, they will all be on the website soon. We keep them all up on the About Us section of the website. So thank you to everybody for voting on those 2 motions, and welcome to the new board members. I'm really excited. Our first board meeting is Tuesday, so we're really going to jump in and get to work right away. So we're going to turn it over to Mike Shortino now to give us our treasurer's report. So Michael, do you want to swap and make Mike the presenter?
Yep, so Mike will be the presenter in just a second.
Okay.
Oh.
We're also flexible now. Patient.
Without further ado, this is the treasurer's report for the annual meeting. I'm not going to be sharing my screen, so I'm just going to be talking. You'll see my video, but nothing really to share. But I did want to thank you for attending this year's annual meeting, our first ever virtual meeting. So this is uncharted territory for all of us, right? So just as a way of introduction, my name is Michael Shortino. I'm a Loudoun Wildlife board member, and I am a member of the finance committee. And so I'll be providing the treasurer's report for our treasurer, Linda C., who was not able to attend today. So I will be providing the update. So just as a reminder, the Loudoun Wildlife is an IRS-approved nonprofit, meaning that we pay no federal income taxes on our we pay no federal income taxes. Our contributors receive tax advantages from those gifts that they provide to the organization, so this tax exempt status is very important to us and the viability of our organization. So it's the Loudoun Wildlife Finance Committee and the board of directors who work together with Michael's staff to create budgets and to monitor our financial activity throughout the year, and in some years pivot like we must do this year with 2020, and report back to members annually at the annual meeting. So we also do a report to the IRS. That's via our Form 990, copies of which are available on the Loudoun Wildlife website. We have prior 990s for 2008, 18, 2017, 2016, and we'll be posting 2019 up on the website shortly after we get done with the review process and the submission. So the 990 it's a pretty dry looking document. It's an IRS document. But on page 1, we tell the IRS that our mission is to inspire, to engage, and to motivate people to preserve and restore wildlife habitat. And so the 990 is a way for us to tell the IRS and to communicate to the IRS and to others our story on an annual basis, and from a financial standpoint. So it communicates transparency and accountability, and to you, our members, and to the general public. And it's really the record that allows us to maintain our tax exempt status. So it's a very important document from a finance standpoint, and for us to be able to manage and maintain our tax exempt status. And as a reminder, nonprofits can earn more than they spend, but we must keep our excess and use it for future programs. So and we refer to this excess as our fund balance. So another way to think about the fund balance is basically after all of your expenses are paid for, what do you have left over? And so for last year, last year that ended December 31st, 2019, we increased our fund balance by $1,000, roughly $1,000. We started the year at about $219,000, and we increased it to $220,000. And so, which is a good thing that we're able to preserve that fund balance and add a little bit to it. The total revenue for last year was $236,000. Near all of it came from our member donations and various grants that Michael had mentioned before. And our total expenses were $235,000. So we were able to raise and have revenue of about $236,000 increase, and our expenses were $235,000. So we were able to add that $1,000 to our fund balance, which is demonstrating that we're maintaining the books and maintaining our proper our operations in a proper way. The details of all this activity can be found in our 990 when we do post it, and you can read through that to get an idea of what the organization is doing on a fiscal basis. So as we roll into 2020, lots of changes in 2020, and the board and the finance committee are looking at different ways of fundraising and different ways of operating our programs. So it is a new paradigm for us. So as we get deeper into 2020, we'll be monitoring and pivoting and adjusting as necessary. We did start off the 2020 in a good, strong financial position, so that will help us weather any changes that we see coming, down the road in 2020. So with that, the organization is in a healthy fiscal standpoint, and we look forward to keeping it that way. And please reach out if you have any questions or concerns. And thank you to everybody who helped with this important mission over all the years.
Thanks, Mike.
Back to you.
So now we get to move on to a little bit more fun thing. Not that finance isn't that fun, but this is the part of the program where we offer out some thank yous and some awards. And our first thank you award recognition that we need to address is our outgoing board members. Some of them have been on the board for a long time, some for a short time. And typically we would try to find a gift or something to give to them. But this year we've decided to step outside the box and set a precedence for years to come. And we are going to unveil soon a section of our website that highlights all of our past board members. So watch for that to come up. And a huge thankful to this year's outgoing board members, who are Ann Owen, Patty Saris, Jill Miller, and Janet Locklear. We are all honored to have served with you. You guys have made a huge contribution to our organization, and we look forward to seeing you as participants in programs, and maybe you'll do another stint on the board at some point. So thank you to all of our outgoing and all past board members. So we are going to now do we have 2 awards that we give. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. All right, so we have some volunteer awards to give, and I was going to show you the first one. The first volunteer award that we give is the Joe Coleman Award. I've covered up the name, and I just wanted to state a little bit about why we give a Joe Coleman Award. So Joe is a founding member of Loudoun Wildlife, and he is somebody who really has demonstrated leadership over the years. He's probably put in more board member more years as a board member than anybody knows. He serves on several boards throughout the community. He's very civic minded in a global perspective, and has a passion and sees the big picture for Loudoun Wildlife. So we really try to find somebody who embodies that. And I also wanted to just say that these awards, these boxes, are made by Unison Pottery and Tile Works. Joan Gardner is the artist who creates the tile on the front, and her work can also be seen at the libraries. So this year, receiving the Joe Coleman Award is someone who is recently rolling off the board this year. And we just recently started tracking volunteer hours at Loudoun Wildlife, so only I think since mid-2018. And this person has racked up over 900 volunteer hours since that point in time. She's fairly new to Loudoun. She moved here in 2014. Someone we all know and love her wildlife photos. She travels the world and shares her photos with us. There's some amazing photos. Her own yard is a model of wildlife habitat. She began clearing invasives several years ago, and this year she keeps posting all these fabulous native plants she's finding that are rare and unusual and so cool, and we're all very jealous. She got her property certified in 2015 by the Audubon at Home program, and in 2017 became coordinator of that program. And we were going to miss her as she rolls off the board, because Ann always brings a calm voice of logic to our board meetings. So we can all congratulate Ann Owen. Thank you so much for your contribution to the board, and we will be dropping off your award at your house very soon. So thank you, Ann. And if you know Ann, send her congratulations. let her know how grateful we are for all of her service as a board member, as well as all the volunteering and leadership she provides for Loudoun Wildlife. So our second award that we like to give is for the Volunteer of the Year Award. This is a non-board member person, someone who shows a lot of initiative and some leadership, but not necessarily leadership, but we still want someone who has that passion for wildlife and wants to share it with others. So this year we've chosen someone who has contributed over 200 hours just in the last 2 years to Loudoun Wildlife. He is on several committees. He is very active with things going on at the Black Oak Wildlife Sanctuary, butterfly count leader, the Christmas bird count leader. He's very into birds. Let's see. But actually, you know, there should almost be two names on this award, because if you know this person, you also know his wife, because they tend to do pop-up bird walks. They organized the first big sit in Loudoun County at Morven Park. And people always say about Brian Henson that Brian is so calm and he will share his knowledge with even the beginners. And he's very respectful, knowledgeable. And Brian, we thank you. And Allison, we know this is, you deserve part of this award, because the two of you are quite a team and a force to be reckoned with in Loudoun Wildlife. So we thank you, Brian, so much for all that you do for us. So, and that concludes our awards. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, if I can. All right. And that brings us down to the state of the organization. And it's an interesting year to have to give a report on the state of Loudoun Wildlife this year. It's been a great year. If we talk about just 2019, fabulous. We knocked it out of the park. It was the first full year that we had Michael on board as an executive director. And I think we've all been really impressed at how much Michael has embraced Loudoun County as his own and made it his home, and really shown that he cares about everything and really led our organization to a next level. I mean, again, I can't thank Michael and the staff for all the help that they've given over the past couple of years. We had more programs than ever in 2019. We've had more participants ever. Our membership was growing, and we really started off 2020 on the right note. We had our first social event at the Purcellville pub, and we really did pack the pub. We had a lot of people show up, and it was the first of what was supposed to be 10 fundraising social events, which has really made us think. So we were really flying through the year. Things were doing good. We closed on Black Oak this year, which is a huge jewel in our belt. And then the COVID hit. And so, to be honest, I have to say that we're all a little scared of what's going to happen in the future. And it is going to be hard for Loudoun Wildlife, as it is for everyone. You know, we are dealing with the same issues as every other nonprofit, but we hit 2020 strong. So we had an aggressive fundraising budget. We were still able to pivot for Wine for Wildlife. We made our budget numbers there. We're looking for all sorts of creative ways to move forward and keep our programs rolling, helping people to connect with nature. So, well, I can't lie, 2020 is going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge, but we think we're in a good place. We think we're strategically positioned to make 2020 a good year, even with everything that's going on. At our next board meeting, our plan is to talk about how we're going to tackle reopening and getting our programs going again, and what that's going to look like for the future. But I think the thing that's going to help the state of Loudoun Wildlife more than anything is what everybody can do, what all of the members can do. So for you, you know, yes, your donations are part of a key, but to increase our membership is going to be huge. So share Loudoun Wildlife with your friends. You know, spread the word. If you have finished with your Habitat Herald, pass it along. Share those passions. Let people know that you're passionate about Loudoun Wildlife. If you have ideas or creative ideas, anything to help us out there, get involved. So I think as members going forward, to help us keep this good state that we're in, we need to all work together. Everybody needs to be an active member of Loudoun Wildlife, not just a member. So whether it's liking us on social media, commenting, sharing things, joining a committee, giving us donations, whatever works in your realm, that's what we need from you. So I think going forward, we just need to be a more cohesive group. We need to stick together, and we will get Loudoun through this, and we will help connect people with nature. We're going to keep protecting habitat. We've got big plans for the future. It's been a great last 12, 18 months have been really good. The last 2, we're working it out. So we're still going strong. It's going to be a good year, but we're going to have to work hard to make a good year. So that is my state of the organization. If you have any questions, again, I just wanted to say, make sure you send them on to Michael or myself or any one of the staff members or board members, and we can help you out. We'll make sure that they get answered. So I think we have just a couple minutes before Sam is ready to talk. Is Sam on yet? Do you know, Michael? I don't see his name.
I haven't seen with him yet. We are trying to get in touch with him.
Okay.
Just give us a couple minutes. And so we can take 5, or we weren't scheduled to start the presentation until 4 o'clock. So we have a few minutes, and then we are just trying to verify with Sam.
Okay, so we can officially adjourn our business meeting, and we can take a 5-minute break, and we'll get Sam on the line here, and we can work on introducing him.
Perfect. And then Julie, somebody mentioned in the chat box, could you hold up the Volunteer of the Year awards?
Yes. So here is the Volunteer of the Year for Brian Henson. They're actually a box, which is really cool. So it's a tile, and then they kind of grout the tile in, and you can see it's a box. If I come back, so you can, I would put my rock collection in there, full of rocks. I know you always see these at the annual meetings, but you never get a good close-up look of them. So that was the Volunteer of the Year award. And then the Joe Coleman Award. So they're very cool. And I was reading up on Joan Gardner before the meeting, and she's done installations at maybe 6 or 8 different libraries around Loudoun County. They're pretty cool, and they're very different. Like, they don't all have the same look to them, so it's really neat. So that could be your summer bucket list if the libraries are open. Go see all her murals.
Yeah. Joan changed those awards a little bit for us this year. As you probably know, we used to have a brass plate on the front of the boxes. This year, she included the names right on the award itself, which is really a nice change.
Yeah, they're very cool. She does have a little shop too, I think, in Unison.
Yep.
On
Yes.
Unison Road in Middleburg, Virginia. Apparently Unison is a town as well, but it's only like 30 people. So their mailing address must be Middleburg. But so you can go visit her shop and tell her you saw the great work she did for Loudoun Wildlife.
Yeah, Unison is one of Loudoun historic villages. So if you ever went to Loudoun County's website, it'll be listed in there.
She raises bees and collects honey.
Ah.
I just unmuted myself. On Unison Road, she has once she starts getting honey, she has a little booth where you can just buy honey. It's totally you just leave your money and take the honey. It's really good honey. So if you drive by there, it's worth a stop.
That's good to know. People are always looking for local honey, especially because it helps with a lot of allergies. I hope Sam is okay. We did have a check-in with him last week, and he said he was going to be early. So.
He definitely has the link, and I see he was at a walk yesterday in the Eastern Shore, so
Okay.
Facebook.
See, we have somebody waiting for a name, so maybe that's Sam. While I was doing the awards thing, 2 wild turkeys walked past my window and it was really hard to stay focused. We have these 2 male turkeys that hang out in our backyard and they like to wake us up about 5:45 every day.
Uh-huh.
I hear there's a bald eagle flying around over here in Hamilton too, so keep your
Oh,
eye
is
out.
there- We see them every so often around here. We saw them a couple years ago. We had them sitting right by our garden eating one of our chickens. Had a great meal. Michael, were you able to find Sam or get a hold of him?
Not yet. So we're trying to, we've called him and emailed him, so we'll give it a few minutes and go from there.
Okay. Well, we could fill in with what's blooming in everyone's yard. Has anybody got anything exciting flowering? This morning I was watching tons of bees on the Virginia Sweet Spire. Those flowers are just opening.
Yeah, it's the first time I've seen many bees at all.
Yet the warm weather's helping.
Yeah. I had a
Watching
black
the
snake
baby
in my.
robins being fed in the back.
Go ahead, Evelyn, or whoever.
I'll put in a plug for the Virginia Native Plant Society. If you go to, there's an Instagram page now. It's the Piedmont VNPS, and we have a wildflower of the week. So each week we post a picture with a clue, and the next week we identify the plant and have a couple of paragraphs of just fun things about it. That might be stuff you wouldn't normally find in a field guide. And then we put in next week's plant. So I think we're on week number 10 at this point. So it's things that would be blooming in the general area of the Piedmont that we try to, so you should be able to go out and find most of the plants that we put on. So if you want one little challenge. And anyway, Kristen Zimmett and I have a good time. She's very more poetic than I am. As you know, I'm sort of science oriented. So we work together to come up with some fun facts.
Oh, that's neat. We should make sure to share those on our site. That's fun stuff.
Yeah, maybe there's some kind of link.
Yeah.
So which site are you posting those on, Emily?
We now have an Instagram page, and it's Piedmont VNPS, I think.
Okay, I don't use Instagram, but
I hadn't done Instagram before. It's not. That's where it is. I think it may be on a Facebook page, but I'm not sure about that.
So Sam is going to
Mary
call.
Ann, were you saying you had exciting or something? Oh, nice.
So Sam is going to call in, so he should be calling in just a few minutes.
On the Tuesday meeting. Yeah,
But we'll see if he calls in from his home or like out from the field.
yeah, none of the people knows how to do that. So everybody knows how to get to that.
I was just going to say that yesterday I had a black snake in the shrub next to our front steps. And then I saw that there was a family of catbirds mobbing it and doing their little mewing call. First I heard the catbirds and I saw there was a snake in there trying to catch one of the babies.
So Sam's computer crashed.
Oh, no.
So we're getting him the phone number to call in. So he should be joining us in a few minutes.
Okay.
I don't know why we can't see more of these people.
I'm really excited. In my container garden, I mentioned earlier that I have 2 different types of Coreopsis blooming right now. And then I have a Virginia sweet spire shrub from Ann Garvey that's blooming. Mine's also blooming. And then I have like 1 phlox flower still hanging on to life. But I have some buds from my butterfly weed is about to start blooming, and I think I have a few other things that are about to bloom. And this year, my Joe Pye weed, for those of you who don't know, I put Joe Pye weed in a container. And last year I got about 5 or 6 stalks that were, I don't know, 6 or 7 feet tall. And this year I have, like 25 or 30. It fills up like a whole, like, 24-inch wide container, and it is glorious. I'm very excited when it starts blooming.
No one else would put a full-size Joe Pye weed in a pot.
I mean, it says a lot of different things about me, but I personally love it. Jesse loves to make fun of me for it, but I think it's amazing.
That's great. You're going to have so many butterflies on it. It's going to be awesome.
Well, Michael, I've used the pictures of those pots on your deck in several presentations to show that you can really put a meadow on a balcony. So well done and thank you.
You're welcome. I've been trying to take photos about every week this year, so you can have some updated photos, because some of the it's really interesting to see how the pots have changed from last year to this year, because some things just exploded, and I was like, oh, that's what they mean by aggressive spreader. So it's exciting to see.
Maybe Michael's pots need their own Instagram account.
Yeah. Yeah, so last year the Joe Pye weed had the most bees and pollinators of any of the flowers that I had. So it was really exciting to see.
Yeah, Joe Pye weed and mountain mint are 2 really good ones for the pollinators for sure.
Well, I bought a whole bunch of plants from Julie in the fall, and they're really tall. I mean, they look great. I can see them really well just looking out my window. They're down at the bottom of the field. But the deer debarked 2 witch hazels, and I thought they were completely dead, but I cut them off about 6 inches because they were debarked above that completely. I mean, completely debarked. And they're both sprouting out. So I bought a replacement, and now I have 3. Anyway, the garden's looking great. The zizia bloomed, and the elderberry is got buds. It hasn't opened yet.
Oh, nice.
But it really everything looks really great.
I think everybody's been working in their gardens this year too. It seems like yards never looked so nice. People are planting like crazy.
Not here.
just discovered a new plant that I've never grown before called wild kidney bean. I was really excited about that. I got 3 of them I'm gonna plant out in my meadow this morning I welded a trellis that out of some just rebar to put out in the middle of the field, and I'm gonna grow this wild kidney bean up. It has really pretty purple flowers and you can eat it, and it's native, and but it's apparently very hard to collect the seeds because the seeds can shoot out of the pods up to 10 feet. So we'll see if I can ever make more wild kidney beans or not. But for now, I'm excited to have it myself.
Wow, where's
You
that?
might try putting putting some kind of net around it so you can catch the seed.
Yeah,
Well, is it native to Virginia, Julie?
it is native to Virginia. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, it's excited about it.
Do you know the genus?
You know what?
I can look it up. And I can't find it under wild kidney bean, so there must be some other names,
Yeah.
common names.
All right. Sam, did you just join the call by phone? Oh, whoops. Oh,
Michael, that may have been me joining because I lost my connection, so I joined by phone now.
okay. I just realized that I'm gonna unmute everybody because that way, if he joins by phone, he will automatically be unmuted.
I had a question. We're going to sign off, but will this be on YouTube later?
Yeah, so we're recording this, and that's the idea, is that we post it to our YouTube channel.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
bye, Michael.
Bye, Emily.
Bye-bye.
Everybody else, remember Pitt Temple? I said, no, why would we?
Oh, I
So
see. It's
Emily-
called wild bean or thicket bean.
So it's the Latin name, I'll murder it, is Phaseolus polystachios. PHAS.
Yeah, I just found it. Yeah.
Okay,
just
and it's
got it.
native, to like the 3 counties just south of here.
Yeah. Nice. Looks pretty.
Something different anyway.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes,
There's
is that you, Sam?
Yeah.
Awesome. Welcome. So go ahead, and then if you are not Sam, you please mute yourself so that will reduce any background noise. So Sam, and except for you, Julie. So Julie, do you want to give a quick introduction? And then we'll get started with Sam.
Sure. So for those of you who have never heard Sam talk before, he works at the USGS at the Patuxent, I probably said that wrong, Wildlife Research Center, and works on a lot of monitoring programs for amphibians, the BioBlitz, cricket crawl, frog watch, and is currently working on one for bees. In the wildlife circle, Sam is widely known for his extensive knowledge of bees and pollinators. One of the things that he works on is this high-res photos of insects, which you can find on Flickr and USGS bee inventory. And they are some really cool photos. And I believe they're also in a book. Is that right, Sam?
Yeah, there is a book, although that is out of print. It's possible, I guess, you can find it on, on Amazon still, but I haven't looked actually.
So for those of you who have seen Sam talk before, you know what you're in for. If you've never been to one of Sam's presentations, prepare to be inspired and learn what you can do for the pollinators. So with that, you can take it away, Sam.
All right, thank you very much. And I just repeat my apologies for not having any slides or a computer or anything today. I will email you a list of links, which includes a bunch of the old talks and some of the kinds of things that I'm going to be talking about. We have references to on the internet, such as the relationship between different species of bees and different kinds of plants. But I think, I use slides as prompts anyway, so other than not having any visuals, which is sad, I'm going to go through, I think, the main points that I wanted to make in this talk, and then we can answer questions depending on what kind of time there is. So I just want to double check. Can people still hear me? Hello? Anyone there?
Yes, I think we're all muted.
Yes.
We're all muted.
Okay,
so
good.
We can hear
All right,
you.
you're all muted. I just, I every once in a while I've been on one of these talks and then I realize that the phone line dropped. I'm not in, the most awesome cell phone area, but I think we are good. Okay, good. Just wanted to check. All right, so what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about what, as conservationists, we often work with in terms of sets of assumptions, is that we have an idea of that habitats are important and that a lot of that research and a lot of the background on wildlife habitat and how we manage our landscapes comes from frankly, a bird point of view, because both as a society that values bird watching and as a society that has decided that migratory birds becomes a federal responsibility. So they're considered trust species. So it's like the FBI. Anything that crosses state boundaries is given to the federal government as in terms of their responsibilities, whereas things that don't migrate, which are most things, plants, insects, and whatnot, those are considered state responsibilities, and the states and the federal governments and their respective categories, they manage those for the good of the public. So what the consequences of that is that we have spent a lot of money and we have resources at the federal level to look at nationally and the conservation and the needs of birds, which we know quite a bit now, and not so much about the needs and the conservation of insects, which we know very little, including, for example, we'll get into this a little bit when we talk more specifically about bees, about even what the bee species or other insects are. So we're ramping up on that. That's why we're talking today. You would not have had this talk maybe 10 and certainly not 20 years ago, because you would be talking about birds or some plant-based type of activity. So what I want to do, though, today is sort of change that ideal, change that notion of what to consider when you have a piece of land or you are working with a municipality or working in any particular region as to, and particularly if it's your property, what kinds of things you do on that property to make it a better place, make it more in sync with the earth. So a little tiny bit of background here. First, that in terms of bees, well, let's talk birds. So I think in the basic list for Maryland and Virginia is about 300 species of birds that go through there regularly. And then if we look at bees for both Virginia and for Maryland, we're at a list of about 450. And as we go along, it would not be a surprise at all if we hit about 500. Jointly, because we don't share absolutely all the species, we're about at 500 species right now. And this includes Northern Virginia and places where you don't necessarily have lots of native habitat. Bees are small. That's one of the interesting and valuable things to think about and consider, is that bees are very small and their populations can be retained by very small chunks of land. And it's less dire in some ways in these highly developed areas for bees, at least in terms of opportunity, because their founding populations are still extant somewhere in most cases. So if you're dealing with bird populations and managing for things, you've heard probably a lot of discussion about the saving of forest and, oh, sorry, did someone say something?
No, I think we just got a little bit of feedback there for a second.
Oh, okay. All right, am I coming in okay? Should I try moving to a different place or?
No, someone else just joined by phone, and I think there was just a little bit of feedback right when they joined.
Oh, before muting. Yeah, got it. Okay, so what the point I was trying to make is that when we're managing for birds, it's a different perspective. So with bird populations, what we're looking at is managing habitat. I think a lot of people are aware of forest interior birds. That was a big push, which I actually was involved in because I come from a bird background years ago, where we looked at the main problem being the fragmentation of forested landscapes by development and agriculture, and that despite the presence of woodlands, the disappearance of a large number of forest interior species, we would call them. And so there's been an emphasis on joining forests and replanting and loss of forest in bird landscapes. And then more recently, we've seen a big effort to look at some of the grassland and scrub areas and think about those things like for yellow-breasted chats and savanna sparrows and dickcissels further to the west, and grasshopper sparrows more close to home, and a variety of species that have really been the ones that have declined the most in our regions. And so, but the solutions have been, okay, well, we need to restore those kinds of areas, and there hasn't been that much of a concentration on how they get restored and what are the small aspects. It's been, we need to bring back forests, so we're going to plant a bunch of trees, and it doesn't really matter which species those might be. Similarly, for grasslands, you know, we need to bring back grasslands. Let's plant a series of warm season grasses that are native, and we're not going to worry about that. At the insect level, and this is part of the contrast here, you have these many different species of insects, and their requirements are often very specific, and they often have to do with very specific individual groups of plants or types of plants, because now I'm talking about bees, but we're actually also going to be talking in a very general way about the conservation of other insect groups, because other insect groups, maybe sap feeders, they also have a long list of requirements in terms of plant species things. Certain species, for example, of Flexamia leafhoppers are only going to be on one or two species or a genus at most of warm season grasses. So we can go through these different insect groups and see that the world is divided in a very different way, and it's much more closely associated with very specific types of plants. Moving back to bees, what we have with bees is that bee species are all obligate pollen feeders. So by that I mean that the young bees are being fed in one way or another a mix of pollen and nectar, and there's a group of bees that are parasitic on other bees, but they're still consuming the pollen and nectar mix that was created by the host bee. It turns out, though, that plants and bees as a group that has co-evolved together, and you can witness this by just your understanding and knowledge of wildflowers. If you go through your Rolodex of wildflower types or look out the window at your garden, you see all these sizes and shapes and colors. All that size and shape and color are strong indicators of how plant species have divided the world up. And what they're looking for, and also on their timing, time of day even of when they bloom, but also time of year, Each of those flower species is targeting a different set of bees, and they have different requirements. And additionally, from the plant point of view in this relationship, they're spending a lot of their plant money on creating a nutritious pollen that has use for bees but doesn't necessarily have use for the plant. So they're wrapping that each of these pollen grains with a wrap that of pollen kit, we would call it, which is also a kind of a bee glue, so it sticks to the bees, that has lipids, fats, proteins in particular that are going to be useful to raising baby bees, but not really useful to the plants. And so the problem from the plant point of view is that if you simply lay those that smorgasbord of yummy pollen out there, lots of things are going to eat it, and they have to dial back the insect groups and predators, essentially, of pollen that are consuming the pollen, or the bacterias and the fungi that are growing on the pollen that are not going to yield pollination and dial in their friendly pollinator groups, so which are almost entirely bees. And so what's going on is that bees have then developed a special tools to access the different floral shapes. They come out at different times of day. Bees, in almost all cases, are coming out in only at the time of year that their flower is blooming. They also are have developed tolerances to the chemicals that the plants have added, essentially poisons, or what's the opposite of attractants, the repellents that make the pollen distasteful at minimum to other groups of insects that may want to have access to all this nutrition, but the plant isn't, wishes them not to because of the load of pollen, because the pollen is going to be consumed and it's not going to be transferred from the stamen to the pistil. So all that's to say that what has evolved because of that kind of tension between these two groups, and there's always a tension in lots of these kinds of very specific insect relationships, which many of them are, is that I'm trying to see, is this true? Yeah, so all insect groups, all bee groups have strong preferences. This includes, and I should probably, as an aside, mention, for some of you may not be familiar with the relationship between honeybees and our native bees, but honeybees are also highly specialized. Let's back up. Honeybees also have strong preferences. So not all flowers are equally attractive to honeybees, which are the most general of all the bees that we have in the area, even though they're not native. So they'll use pollen and nectar from a wide variety of plants, but not all. And certainly when they have choices, they make preferences for groups of plants that meet their societies, which honeybee colonies are, needs. Just as an informational thing, when we're talking about insects, or when I'm talking about native bees, I'm really talking about bees other than honeybees. Honeybees are not native. They've been on the continent now for 3 or 4 centuries, but they are radically different in terms of how in terms of their life history. So, for example, in none of our native bees, this includes bumblebees, which have a almost colonial nature. We don't have multi-year queens. We don't have a complete division of reproduction with only the queen producing the males and the females. We don't have honey. We don't have celled waxy comb. We don't have swarms. We don't have barbed stings. No one's allergic to our native species, but they're allergic sometimes to the honeybees. The honeybee system is fantastically specialized and intriguing and interesting, and it is no wonder that we have so many beekeeping clubs because of it. And it's the only place we're going to get honey locally. But our native bee species do many, which we don't have time for today, different things in terms of how they are parsing the environment. So back to my point. My point was that you have native bee species and honeybees using the same set of flowers. They're all dividing it up differently. There is a collaboration between plants and bees, but many of our native bee species are very narrow, so they're only going to one or two, usually at the genus to maybe to the family group, only to composites in the fall. There's bees that are only on some of the spring ephemerals. So there's one that only does spring beauties. So at this time of year, we're looking at things like chestnut has a bee specialist, which is now very rare, but it's on chinkapin. We have a whole series of Lysomachia specialists. Also, it turns out very rare. When Lysomachia is starting to bloom here pretty soon, and it's a plant that we encourage the planting and encourage the management for wild populations. So this is where we go now if we're interested in pollinators. So we can be specific, like for example, the Lysomachia, which is loosestrife, not the purple loosestrife, but the kinds of loosestrifes that we have native like world and fringed loosestrife, and they use the oil component in their nests. And no loosestrife, then you don't have any of the native loosestrife bees. When we look at management, then we can get very specific. Like for example, at our lab, we're managing the landscape for loosestrife bees because we have big populations of loosestrife. And we also have the bee, Macropus ciliata occurs there, which is the only place I know regionally that still has that particular species. For people like yourselves who are probably not as knowledgeable in depth, there is a website where we have compiled this information for the most highly specialized sets of bees. And I, of course, don't know what that website is off the top of my head in terms of a URL, but it's relatively easy to find. And I certainly am available to, if people were to email me, and I'll send a set of links to the organizers of the conference today too afterwards. But if you wanted to look it up right now or look it up soon after the talk, if you dial in or you do a internet search for Fowler, Fowler, these are our last names, Fowler and Droege, and my last name is Droege, and I would suppose it's on the information sheet that you had too. And then I mean, that combination is unique enough. And you'll see there's a link, and it has tables and tables of the bee species and the plants groups that they use. And you need not, unless you're interested, look at the particular bee species names and groups. And we always are encouraging people to do that more. But the natural history of bees is one that dials more towards the microscope work and technical and less towards the amateur. Although I'll bring up a publication now or two that is giving more and more people access to the to looking at bees in the wild. But the plant-wise, within that website, there's the plants are going to be very familiar, and we're not talking a lot of rare plants. So part of that system is that rare plants don't have rare bees. Because the problem is if you're a rare plant, then your populations wink out too much, and the bee populations can't evolve any kind of specialization. So rare plants tend to be within groups that are attracting generalists or other members of that genus of plant are, as a group, they have specialized bees. So, there's things like vaccinium. So the blueberries have specialist bees. Willow, which is a very important and underrated plant in the early spring for bees, and has, so there's male and female trees. There's gobs of nectar right at the very beginning of the spring. And and so your queen bumblebees and lots of the other species that first come out will use particularly the nectar from those plants. But there's also 8 different species of bees that only use willow pollen to supplement their nests. So, but willow is just not something we pay much attention to. It doesn't. The flowers are green. They don't need to be very colorful because the willow specialist bees are nesting right in the ground at the location of the willow patches, because these willow patches tend to be long-term kinds of things. And the willows are not really trying to attract other bees from long distances like some of the kinds of flowers that we're used to, these big, tall sunflowers, these very colorful species that we plant in our gardens. Those are long distance signals to attract these groups of bees. I'm spending too much time on willow, but it's just one example that you'll see in these tables of what would be, I would say, if you're going to be bee-centric in your management of any kind of landscape, is to look through that table and either do plantings. So in most cases, it's a plug type of activity or plantings of plants, or to go back to the landscape if it's any kind of naturalized ones, and emphasize those plants in terms of what kinds of things you're going to recover back. Within woodlands, so we can kind of divide things into woodlands and non-woodlands in the bee world too, just like with birds. And in the woodlands, almost all the activity is in the spring. In fact, I can't even really, maybe some edge of the wood species, maybe in the late summer and fall. But if you think about it, you have this big flush of spring blooming plants. So your trilliums to bluebells and on down the list, there are a contingent of bees that use only those species, and they're there in huge numbers. It's perhaps particularly our bottomlands before lesser celandine, constitute our greatest concentration of native bees per square meter in the region. And then we also have a whole series of blooming shrubs that time of year that are in these areas. So think about huckleberries, amelanchiers, and so forth that are occurring. And then starting in May, the system starts closing down. Right about this time, there used to be things like there used to be American chestnut would be the last one. And sadly, most of those American chestnuts have disappeared, but and people don't even think of them as pollinator plants. But just shows you what we lose sometimes without even knowing it. But chestnut has a long series of insects. There's one bee species that we're aware of. There might be others that are specialized only on chestnut. So the whole movement to backcross chestnuts and bring them back into the forest in the region has huge consequences in terms of allowing pollen and nectar to continue further into the summer in environments that normally would no longer have them. Right now, the main issues within management for our woodlands for these spring blooming plants, there's really two. One is the management of deer. It's not an environment that has that many. I mean, you can all come up with a list of invasive plants, so much as it's an environment that is being consumed by deer in the spring. So deer management and indirectly becomes bee management. And then the other component is that we tend to plant a lot of trees into environments that, to bring back forests into environments that should normally be, that these days, because of the loss of open and disturbed and transitional habitats, would probably be better off as landscapes that would harbor open country plants. So just a quick side note. So our landscapes, I think a lot of people would have thought that prior to human incursions, including American Indian, we would have had a landscape that is largely forested. And the answer, no, it was always a mix of forest and openings, some of which were quite extensive. Some were extensive enough to have things like tea pens, which are basically greater prairie chickens in the east. Fire, disturbance, large mammals. Indians came in, managed the landscapes with fire. Colonists came in and also used fire, but also were very inefficient agriculturalists. And now we have very efficient agriculture with nothing living in it. And then we have these large forested landscapes. So the second component there of other than forests is to look at managing and keeping some of these open areas and the biodiversity associated with them. So in both the forested case, particularly with young forests, and also in the cases of the areas that we still allow to remain open, we often have inadvertently squeezed out a lot of the biodiversity because we're fertilizing, mowing, managing in a way where we have greenery throughout the year, and we have certain blooming plants that are encouraged by even by our plantings. So when we think of the kind of wildflower plantings that we might incorporate into those activities, what we see is that the breadth of different kinds of plant species that normally would occur in there become fewer and fewer, and they're concentrated in smaller and smaller numbers of spaces. And that's the kind of activity from a strategy for a landscape, i.e. a county, and your region, is to work with botanists and the few biologists that are around here, but really we're talking about all insects, to and probably not worry so much about the bee species as as individuals, because it's too difficult right now to do the kinds of work to assess and watch and follow and learn natural histories of those, but to concentrate on bringing back this biodiversity of plants back into as many landscapes as possible. In the case of bees, that would be flowering plants. In the case of all insects, you would want that to include things like grasses and the non-flowering, different non-flowering plants. You know, even things like lichens have a whole set of moth species that only use lichens. Tardigrades would also be in that category. So backing up to this contrast, so when we had a very sort of easy and simplistic, in a way, although it had its own challenges, sets of management strategies for our landscapes. You know, we wanted food plots for wildlife. We wanted to bring back forests for forest interior birds. We wanted to create grasslands like we're doing it in some of the national parks that in some ways are there just to create cultural, historic types of grasslands. And that brings back certain kinds of birds. But from dogs but after I spoke out about in a very shallow way, I mean, there's so many details. We could go through every single species of blooming plant and talk about its strategies and needs and what the different bee populations might be for that. But the tie together here is that even for vertebrates, living in and having habitat that includes a diverse array of plants has high and more acknowledged and studied and verified value. So think of most of you know Doug Ptolemy's work on that matter of looking at the relationships of native plants and forage for bees. I mean, not forage for bees, I'm very bee-centric. Start looking at native plants and trees in particular, and indirectly then that impacts the number of insect species. Doug is very much concentrated on caterpillars of butterflies and moths. That then feeds the chickadees and the other birds in the area. If we look at also planting native plants in yards and in other areas that will attract native bees, and that allows them to forage. but it also has consequences for the bird friends too. So for example, a lot of our flowering plants are going to produce seed that birds will eat throughout the year and in the winter, providing not only cover from their, the residual vegetative states, but also seeds, rather than having to bring in seeds in the form of bird feeders from lands that grew that seed that could have been prairie or some other kind of valuable thing, where we've, in some ways, we've ruined things twice, right? We build our house, we've taken out all the biodiversity because in the process of building that house requires construction and removal of vegetation. Usually then we extend that throughout the yard. Let's get rid of all this yard. Let's flatten it, smooth it out, get rid of the rocks, plant grass, and then everything has disappeared. So the idea is to return as much of these even small landscapes, because it doesn't take much to keep bees happy, and put them into an environment that is rich in plants. So this is I'm wrapping it up now. This is my message, which is manage for biodiversity of flowering plants if you're bee-centric, but really manage for biodiversity of all the region's plants. And look in the nooks and crannies to bring back some of the more obscure things, at least in a management point of view, in how you mow, use fire, allow things to grow, removal of invasives, diminishment of the deer populations, and the recrafting of things like lawns and highly mowed and managed edges of woods, and think about that in terms of what society values in terms of presentation, but also allows you to augment these augment these areas for the insect groups, which is it's really a plant-centric approach, but more nuanced than what we would do with vertebrates, which is basically a structural response. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think that covers we just have a half hour, I know, so that covers the basics there. And I can answer specifics, and normally I present more examples and, of course, pretty pictures that we take in the lab. But I don't know that we really need that, because the message is actually a pretty straightforward one of biodiversity and return and management of biodiversity of plants, which yields everything else will come.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sam. And then if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and I will verbalize them to Sam, so we don't have a lot of people trying to talk over one another. And Sam, just so you know, since you're on the phone, Siri was able to find one of your older presentations, so we showed a few slides from that, which synced up at times with what you were talking about. Okay.
Yeah. Good. And yeah, we have, just as an aside, we have a catalog of 4,700, 4,600 public domains, high quality slides of bees and plants, lots of flowering plants too, that you can find. And you can also read our blogs about them. So if you're interested in these details, our media handle is at the @ and then USGS, that stands for U.S. Geological Survey. So USGS BIML, B for Bee Inventory Monitoring Lab. And you can find us on Instagram and Flickr. That's where you get the originals, and Tumblr, and we have a Facebook group now for more of the details. So if you're interested, I encourage you to kind of follow us, particularly on Instagram, and where we tell many tales of the relationship between plants and bees. Also, I'll give you while we're waiting to get any questions ready, I'll give you my email address, and feel free to email me, and I can send you these things directly. It's Droege, so S as in Sam, DROEGE usgs.gov.
Great, thanks, Sam. I am not seeing any questions in the chat box. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to
Michael,
type them in.
there is actually a question. So somebody, Miriam Witterville, thank you, Miriam, was thanking Sam for the excellent data tables and was wondering if there was similar work being done in the Western states. Her daughter plans for bees in California. So just wondering that.
Yeah. So there is both work and a very different set of systems. If you look at the nation or the continent, you'll see that actually the greatest biodiversity is in the deserts of the Southwest. So each of these desert ranges has a very different set of plants associated with them, and the bee species tend to be even more specialized, not sure why. And despite what looks like to be a low diverse environment, it's actually highly diverse. So there's lots of plant specialization there. When you get up to the Pacific Northwest, it's more like where we are in terms of the plant diversity and the bee diversity going on there. There's no, like, we've organized the East to create those kinds of lists. Out West, it's much more of a hodgepodge, and I can't give you a citation as to where you would want to go to look up that information about what plants to plant. But if you probably put in some Google searches for the region and bees and specialization, you'll come across at least some of that. It's just really complicated. Once you hit the Rockies, all the plant communities shift, and as do, just think about birds, as do the birds and the bee species and everything else. So I'm just not skilled enough to give you that many examples.
And Sam, we have another question from Margie. Are there any local demonstration areas that you recommend visiting?
Our lab area is moving in that direction, but we're not open. Well, we're not open at all right now, but we're not open yet. So what I hope to is make some local announcements about days that people can come out, because we have 30 acres and we're actively looking at the management of particularly these disturbed, invasive prone or full of invasive kinds of fields or even construction site kinds of things. How do you reintroduce native plants into that kind of tough environment where they have lots of competitors, many of which are invasive species or things like tons of poison ivy? And so we're doing several different kinds of experiments, and we've been growing out our own native plants. And the hint is that we are spending a lot of time looking at combinations with mulch, just from chips from tree companies to initially give a reset to the local environment that would favor our plantings. And we're not doing seeds, we're doing plantings of plugs or small plants, and concentrating on figuring out what kinds of native plants are able to, muscle their ways out. Some of my favorites right now are things like wingstem, Jerusalem artichoke, cup plant, some of which are semi-native, so they're found in the region but not necessarily right around here. But Heliopsis is another really good one for muscling out things like stiltgrass, oxeye sunflower, germander is something that we're playing around with a lot now, and of course we tend to overlook them. Think about asters and goldenrods, which actually do fairly well in our if you travel on the roadsides in the fall. There's a lot of aster and goldenrod if they haven't mowed it down. those, we tend to just think of them as weedy, like why plant them? They're already there. But in an environment, they form and the reason that they're successful, once they're in those environments, they form these and this is the sign of a good plant to use in some of these environments where you have trouble establishing anything, is goldenrods and asters. I guess there's a notion that they're also adding their own chemical warfare or herbicides to the immediate surrounds of their the ground that they're using, but they can gradually push out some of the invasives and establish themselves. Both those plants have a whole series of bees that only go to goldenrods and asters. It's an important component in these open environments. Anyway, that's the directions we're going. I can't give you any other locations that I think have something that I would call demonstrations. There's lots of pollinator gardens out, but I think what we're trying to do is really get people to think more about about what the plant species are. Not so a measure has been traditionally, the measure is like has bees, more plants for a garden are the plants that have the most bees on them. But the analog would be like you can go into the middle of Washington, D.C. and look at a bird feeder, and there's tons of birds there, right? Most of them might be starlings and house sparrows, but they're birds. So in this particular case, it's the same kind of situation where in some of these environments, these plants that attract a lot of bees, and some of them are invasive plants or non-native plants, they're doing it with nectar, or they're doing it with a set of very low quality pollen, and it's like having a bunch of 7-Elevens. There'll be a lot of people there, but they're not, it's not the place where most of your nutrition should be happening. So we have these, that's been our measure. We're at a very shallow level of thinking about pollinators and bees in terms of their needs. And so what we're trying to do is move people to thinking about those next steps, which include a more nuanced plant approach and my recommendation right now, we'll have more and more written material later, is basically looking at providing a diversity of plant species and emphasizing that list that I mentioned from Fowler and Droege of the plants that have communities of bees that are highly specialized on those plants as the initial first cut. And then you can backfill with things like mountain mint and some of the daisies and things that have lots of pollinators on them.
Great. And then so we'll do one more question and then we'll wrap up. And I would like to respond to Miriam's question. She asks, how about doing a Loudoun Wildlife demo garden for local pollen specialists at Black Oak? And that's definitely something that we're considering for that property, is having a diversity of habitat to support the widest possible biodiversity. So we're working on a management plan for that property, but that's definitely something that we are considering. And then so for you, Sam, and if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to email Sam. We will send you all an email with follow-up links, and so you can reach out to him with any of your questions. And then Julie, if you just want to wrap up after this question, we'll go from there. So from Emily, and Emily, if I butcher this or you need to have some follow-up, feel free to unmute yourself. But she asked, how widespread are the various bee species? For example, if one plants Lysomachia, will there be bees around that would use it?
Yeah, so tricky question. So like Lysomachia, the loose stripes. So if you're in an area that has some residual populations of native loosestrife, would sneak in, right? So for example, along the Potomac and the bottomlands of the Potomac, there's still fringe loosestrife populations there. I'm just giving examples that I know of, but this would occur elsewhere. World loosestrife occurs in huge numbers up in Great Meadows and Shenandoah National Park. You can find these populations elsewhere. So if you have those plants around, then you probably have the bees around, even if you're not seeing them well. But if the distance is too great, then obviously then the bees aren't going to be able to find that. If we look at distribution maps of bees, which for Maryland in particular, we know more and more of these bee species, we see that almost all of them have a geographic distribution within the state that's not complete. A few do, but some are more towards the mountains, some only in the Garrett Plateau, some are only on the eastern shore, some only on the sand dunes of the eastern shore. So we get into all these different kinds of reasons that bees are in one place and not in another. So I would look, when you're talking about plants and looking at that list, again, most of these plants are pretty common. You know, the perennial sunflowers, annual sunflowers, they're everywhere. You can also talk to some of the botanically inclined folks about what they're finding in the region. You guys have a great botanical publication. I think it's the Flora of Virginia. I actually have it on my dresser. I look at it almost every night, just reading the accounts. So you should be able to, divine which groups of plants to emphasize. One last example is Mount Cuba, which is in the northern part of Delaware, an area. It's a group that specializes on native plants, and they have done a spectacular job. And what happened recently is a friend of mine who knows his bees went up and did surveys there. And what happened was they had planted so many of these native plants that they found bees that had not been ever seen in Delaware. So these were bees that were on native plants. And some of those bees had not even been seen in the surrounding states. So it's more of a, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. And then as a general rule, of course, you're more likely to attract things when you have large amounts of a particular plant than you have small. It's an imperfect thing, and we're all going to learn from each other in putting these things together. And again, so one last thing, because I know you guys have to move on to other things. I want to apologize greatly for not having my talk or being ready at all for this event. It's totally on me. My apologies. I'm glad that you're able to track me down, though.
Well, thank you, Sam. Theory did do a good job of kind of backing you up with some of your older slideshows, so that actually didn't work out too bad.
Okay, good.
So, but thank you for all your knowledge and everything you're doing to help the bees and pollinators in general. And I think we all got a lot of good ideas. So thanks a lot.
Yeah,
and
I'd love to visit some of your plantings and, take a look at what bees are showing up. And there's a couple groups now in Virginia too, looking at bees. So we'll see, hope to find good new things.
Show you around for sure. Ann Owen also did point out Loudoun Wildlife has some good resources on our website of plants for bees and the pollinator, the Super 9 list and stuff. So check those out if anybody's interested. So to wrap it up today, I just wanted to say a special thank you to all of our volunteers who make Loudoun Wildlife what it is. We have a great organization and we're so lucky to have everybody. Special congratulations to Ann Owen and Brian Henson for their awards, and thank you for everything they do, and staff and everybody for helping us out. And all you members, reach out to people to become members, share the Loudoun Wildlife love of nature with them, and we hope to see all of you in person very soon. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for being patient with all the fun glitches today. It was not too bad.
Well done, Julie.
Thanks, Anne.
And everybody else, Michael.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, good job. Good job.
Thanks.